Davis in Chicago's Communist Party circles in the 1940s. By the way, they also all do the Cantor family, which would go on to mentor a fellow by the name of David Axelrod. And in the Chicago Star that Davis edited, you could find actual campaign announcements for the Cantors. In fact, the Cantor family mentored David Axelrod. The senior Cantor in the 1930s, the whole Cantor family lived in Moscow, where they were official translators of Lenin's writings for the Soviet government. Cantor ran for vice president on the Communist Party ticket in the 1930s. But the Cantors, one of the Cantors was on the group that bought the Chicago Star from Frank Marshall Davis to help Davis leave to go to Honolulu in 1948. Oh, and the name of the purchasing group? The Progressive Publishing Company. The Progressive Publishing Company. But the American Peace Mobilization was created in 1940 to keep America out of World War II and from giving any aid to the British as they were under assault by the Nazis. Why? Because it was a communist front group organization that backed Stalin. And at that point in time, Hitler and Stalin were allies. So American communists, as Herb always said, American communists were Soviet patriots. It was the Soviet Union first. So they had to do what Stalin did. So they argued, they put together an American Peace Mobilization. I counted 1 in every 4 members of the American Peace Mobilization was a minister. They weren't communists, they were religious left ministers. But they put together this American Peace Mobilization to keep America out of the war. Now you're not going to believe this because it's so blatantly unbelievable. The group on June 22nd, 1941, changed its name from the American Peace Mobilization to the American People's Mobilization and became War Hawks overnight. They were outside of the White House protesting for like 60 days for that fascist Roosevelt. These guys were no friends of the Democrats. For that fascist Roosevelt to stop all Lend-Lease aid to Britain. Keep America out of the war. June 22nd, 1941, they literally put down their signs and walked away from the White House and became gung-ho pro-war and became the American People's Mobilization. Why? Why did they become so suddenly pro-war June 22nd, 1941? Anyone know what happened that day? The Nazi invasion. The Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union. So now, right, their country, these communist Americans, now their country had been invaded, the Soviet Union. And so now it was time to be pro-war. All right, I'm going to stop it there because I want to take your questions. It's almost 2:30. I wanted to talk about Ted Kennedy. I also wanted to give some other examples, but I'm going to run out of time here. Oh, last one because this will take 30 seconds. One of my favorite examples. Jimmy Carter, 1994, in Pyongyang, North Korea. I had very free discussions with Kim and with his ministers. He's very friendly toward Christianity, unquote. Describing life in North Korea, 1994, Jimmy Carter. People are busy. They work 48 hours a week. Rosalind and I found Pyongyang to be a bustling city. The only difference is that during working hours, there are very few people on the street. They all have jobs or go to school. And after working hours, the North Koreans pack the department stores, which Rosalind and I visited. I went in one of them. It's like Walmart in American stores on a Saturday afternoon. They all walk around in there, and they seem in fairly good spirits. Pyongyang at night looks like Times Square. Have you ever seen the photo of North Korea at night? Of the Korean peninsula at night, where the north is like a sea of darkness, right? Pyongyang at night looks like Times Square. They are really heavily into neon lights and pictures and things like that, unquote. So that's President Carter on his trip to North Korea in 1994. Carter had been taken to a giant Potemkin village, and he came back and said exactly what they wanted. In fact, he didn't say it. He sat at a typewriter and typed it because it was in a journal that he did for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. So he had time to sit and look at it and think, Well, maybe, I don't know if I should compare it to Walmart, you know? Time to think about it, retype it, get it back, hit the send button, take it. So, all right, good enough. Thank you for your time. I'd like to hear any questions that you have, if you're not depressed. My goal was to come here and depress everybody. Yes?
Russell King. I have a question about a more modern possible exception. You know, we've been having a lot of mass shootings lately, as you know from the news. And I once saw this book called Losing Our Sons, and the father of the man at the Arkansas military recruiting station, the man that was killed there, he showed this film. And they traced the shooter to Yemen. He was trained in Yemen. And we find in most of these mass shootings the supposed cure for these shootings is gun control or mental health. Yeah. Now, in this case, neither gun control nor mental health is relevant. Yeah. Okay, and we had this shooting in Charleston, and the man made racist statements, but we cannot necessarily conclude that he had racial motivations because the same sort of situation could be there as well.
No, that's right.
Can you talk about what deception might be used in relationship to the mass shooting?
Yeah,
that. In fact, if you go back and read, as I have, and this is like an occupational hazard, as I have to read all this stuff. I get up every morning, I read People's World, and I read the Communist Party USA website and all that stuff. But Pravda is Vestia, and Phoebus was really good in the 1980s at getting transcripts of all Soviet media shows. Moscow Studio 9 program. And they used to constantly use these examples of like American shootings and so forth to portray this West that was completely out of control, this America that was completely out of control, and to do things like call for gun control or whatever it was that they wanted to do. So they've been doing that kind of thing for a long time. One of the things I'm researching right now, John Linchowski will appreciate this. In fact, I emailed John on it. I was researching the Soviet role in the shooting of Pope John Paul II in May 1981. And as soon as they started getting blamed for this, and rightly so, they immediately launched a propaganda campaign to blame the shooting on the CIA. And you could find this all through communist literature throughout the 1980s. And they wanted to portray Makhmet Alyasha, the shooter, as having been not working for the KGB or the GRU, but the CIA. And what was amazing were the left-wing sources in the West that would pick the stuff up and use it, because all of these things would feed in to the left's view of the United States, of what they wanted the United States to be. Another one that made it into one of the hearings in Congress was the Soviets concocted these really crude flyers that were supposed to be from the KKK. And they were calling for a banning of black people generally, not African American, from the Olympic Games in 1984. And it was on this kind of KKK pseudo letterhead where it had a guy in like a white hood, and it had some sort of really vile racist slogan underneath it. And it showed like somebody being lynched, and it would say like, no coloreds in the Olympic Games or something like this. And our government went to, I guess somebody in our government went to the whatever branch of the KKK, and the guys from KKK said, we didn't do this. We've never seen this before. I mean, and so they were able to trace that back to Moscow. Now, why would Moscow do that? Because they know that certain leftists in the United States would love that stuff. Oh man, if we could get this in our papers to show how sick racist we are, then this would be just wonderful to portray. And so the Soviets were masters at realizing how beautiful that stuff worked. Carter.
Paul, very good. It's kind of expeditious, your book there on Takedown. Can you just give us your comments on the Supreme Court?
On the Supreme Court,
I'll put it within the context of what I'm talking about. In the book Takedown, I go through, and this is, as I said, winning me all kinds of friends, but I go through the left's 200-year attempt to redefine and reshape and take down what you would call probably the natural, traditional, biblical Judeo-Western, right, nuclear family and marriage. Robert Owen, Charles Fourier, those early socialist utopians were doing it in the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s. Robert Owen, July 4th, 1826, his Declaration of Mental Independence at his New Harmony colony. The Oneida colony, John Humphrey Noyes' colony, they were doing group marriages. They were trying to redefine marriage. They didn't like the idea of male-female marriage. Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto write of abolition of the family, which in 1848 they could already call an infamous proposal of the communists. Marx wrote to Engels, "Blessed is he who has no family." How's that for a twist on the Beatitudes? And Engels loved that because Engels didn't want a family, and Marx was not a very good family man himself. Engels had all these different mistresses who he refused to marry. Engels was preaching the 1960s phrase, smashing monogamy, in the 1880s. And then the cultural Marxists started redefining gender, sexuality. They wanted open marriages. They wanted non-traditional marriage. So I go through in the book this like 200-year effort by the left to take down marriage. And what really opened my eyes to this was, because like I said, because I read People's World every day and Communist Party USA website, I started noticing about 4 or 5 years ago how the American Communist Party have become fanatics for gay marriage. I mean, they've adopted the entire gay agenda. Here's a really amazing thing. This group will appreciate this. Fidel Castro is said to support same-sex marriage, and they've actually been holding gay pride marches in Havana for like 8 years now. Now, you guys know this. Castro used to throw gay people in prison and lunatic asylums. He tried to deport thousands of them out of the country in the Mariel boat lift. Do you ever see the beginning of the movie Scarface? When Al Pacino, right, they're asking Al Pacino if he's gay. Right? That's because Castro was ridding his country of what he saw as vile, unsavory, lunatic homosexuals. Castro is now totally pro-gay, and Mariela Castro, Raul's daughter, is heading up the Sex Institute there. They're trying to do gay marriage in Castro's Cuba. So I started thinking, why are the communists suddenly so pro-gay marriage? They kicked Harry Hay out of the Communist Party, the gay communists, in the 1950s. And really, I think the only explanation that fits is that this finally allows them to fulfill what they've been trying to do for 200 years, which is redefine and reshape and take down the natural, traditional, biblical family. Now, that doesn't mean that same-sex marriage advocates in America are Marxists, because they're not. And 99% of the people who advocate same-sex marriage are not part of a communist plot. They're not communists, and they're not thinking, oh, I want to help the commies abolish the family. But flipping it around, the communists see that 99% as wonderful for their efforts and what they've been trying to do. So it's a fascinating thing. It makes total sense that they would be totally on board for same-sex marriage. And all their different ideas for redefining family in the past, they could never, ever, 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 ever get even 10% support on anything. And to now have 5 justices on the Supreme Court with them and have a majority of Americans supporting it, they're amazed, they're baffled, but they are thrilled beyond belief. Yes?
Mr. Kengor, thank you very much for all that you do, not only the books, but say your writings in the American Thinker.
Oh, thank you.
I have 2 questions. The first one would be to take your starting point where you talked about Christian charity. I understand why you call them dupes.
Yes.
But calling them innocent as doves, there's a first part of that, and is I send you out as sheep among the wolves.
Right.
Be wise as serpents and innocent as doves.
Exactly.
Every single person you mentioned, and I'm sure throughout your book, is an elitist.
Yes.
And if Christ is angry at one thing, it's hypocrisy.
Right.
The strongest passages in the Gospels have to do with hypocrisy.
Right.
And wouldn't you agree that they're not so innocent?
Yes. No, I agree with that. And they, and also too, in fact, the heroes in my book are the people who kind of woke up and redeemed themselves. Even Dewey, I have a chapter called The Redemption of John Dewey, where he's very good on the Trotsky trials. But in part, that's because Sidney Hook and leftists and progressives are pro-Trotsky, but still, he did good work in the Trotsky trials. But you're really onto something there. And the one thing that gets me again and again is, progressive professors and so forth, they're the most cynical bunch you'll ever see, right? They are smart.